Welcome to USFL Game Plan, brought to you by USFL Today. We are your hosts, Angelo and Luke Miller. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at USFL Today and follow our YouTube channel of the same name, and follow Luke at Luke Miller PFN on Twitter. Luke, how's it going, man?
It's going very well. Looking forward to another exciting week of USFL football here.
Yeah, it's been exciting like crazy, huh? Let's look at last week before we get into these week 8 games. Started off with your Stallions and the Breakers going at it, both at the time 4-2. And it wasn't quite the shootout that the first game was. Actually, this game fell right where we talked about last week, low 20s each team.
Yeah, it was a great game. Credit to the Stallions defense, especially in the first half. The Breakers got the ball down to the 2-yard line. Stallions kept them out of the end zone. They got the ball then later down to the 3-yard line, kept them out of the end zone. So limited them to 3 first half field goals, which really probably ended up being the difference in the game. Breakers opened it up a little bit more at the end there, but still barely broke or, hit that 20-point mark. And the Stallions had enough offense kind of throughout the day that it was just not enough for the Breakers to be able to overcome. So definitely a more low-scoring affair than the, 76-point outing we saw the first time around. But still a great game, and you could definitely see these teams have kind of, I don't know, maybe not the Breakers, but the Stallions have at least worked on some of the things that crippled them the first go-around and tried to improve on some of those. The Breakers' defense was probably better than their first go-around in some ways, but their offense has been a struggle now for several weeks. So
looking at the numbers from the game, you talk about the shortcomings, 4 red zone trips for the Breakers, only 1 touchdown, 3 turnovers by the Breakers, 1 on the last Hail Mary play in the end zone to close out the game. And the other telling figure for me was that the Breakers had nearly 33 minutes of possession time as well, and still could only muster 20 points. And their offensive woes continue while they're almost similar to the Generals in the sense that they've got this defense that's playing really well over the last month, but they can't seem to figure out how to outscore their opponents, even with all the talent that they have, Luke.
Yeah, it's strange, I saw a post the other day from the league about, league leading passer, receiver, rusher, and they're still all Breakers players because of how good that offense was to start the year. But that's a little misleading because in the last month, they really have hardly done anything. And so, it's hard to kind of wrap your mind around how does this offense go from as potent as it was to as much as they've struggled. But, I'm sure there's things that opposing defensive coordinators have picked up on, keys, other things where they've been able to adjust and kind of game plan and do some different things to really slow the Breakers down. I know they have had some more turnover issues recently, which that obviously always is a killer. Either their offense has just gotten out of sync or opposing defenses have really figured out what to do to kind of put the clamps on them, because they still have incredible players and incredible potential. But I know their offensive line, I think, has struggled a little bit more than the beginning of the year. The Stallions got a lot more pressure and multiple sacks this game when they had no sacks the first time they played. So, and you could tell that when MBT was under pressure, wasn't able to kind of sit back in the pocket and do what he did the first time they played the Stallions, he just wasn't the same. He couldn't, he wasn't as accurate, didn't make as good of decisions. So I think that's been a big key to defenses slowing them down. The Stallions, they were able to slow West Hills down, which they could not do at all to save their lives the first go round. So the Breakers still have a great offense. They still have great players, but they've got to figure out something to kind of get things rolling again.
Just to punctuate the disparity in their production versus points, 370 total yards of offense, outgaining Birmingham by more than 100 yards on the afternoon, and it still doesn't equate to a win. For Birmingham now, things are looking good. They're 5-2. They've got 3 key games now to close out the season. They'll spend the last 2 weeks of the year in Memphis to wrap up the season, and that's where the division's going to be decided, right there on the field in the Liberty Bowl, Luke.
Yeah, it's crazy. There's a post from the league this week about, week 8 in the South. It doesn't matter who wins, who loses. Anything that happens has zero relevance on the playoffs yet, because there's so many different scenarios in week 9 and 10 of what could happen with these teams playing each other, that nobody can get in and nobody can be eliminated. Even if the Stallions won this Saturday and every other team in the South lost, they're still not a lock for the playoffs, which is crazy. So yeah, those last couple weeks, I was talking to a friend the other day, and he was thinking about maybe making the trip up from Birmingham to Memphis for one of the two final games of the season, Birmingham games of the season. He was like, "Which one would you recommend? Which one do you think will be more exciting?" And I was like, "That's a hard question to answer because I mean they're both going to be such huge games for either making it into the playoffs or determining seeding in the playoffs." So the Stallions have to feel good about where they sit at 5-2, and the best record in the league for sure. But I mean, they can't stop and catch their breath because every game from here on out, I mean, one more loss or a couple losses, they could be sitting in last place in the division. I mean, that's basically what happened to the Gamblers after this past week. They went from being right there in the playoff contention to now they're last in the division. They have tied record with other teams, but with tiebreakers, they're last. So, it's in some ways, the playoffs are kind of starting now because it's kind of teams are getting to that point where we really got to win if you want to stay in the hunt. So should make for some great games coming down into the home stretch here.
Yeah, the correct answer, by the way, is you stay in Memphis for a week and you go to both games.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. No doubt.
Moving on to the second game of the weekend last week, it's the resurgent Philadelphia Stars and the sliding Pittsburgh Maulers in a game that was exact opposite of what we thought it was going to be from a final score standpoint, with Philly coming out on top 37-31. I think you half joked, Luke, during the show last week, watch this game turn out to be a 35-32 shootout. And I said, it's going to be like that. And we were tongue in cheek, of course, but lo and behold, there it is. The Maulers managed to break 30 points and they lose. If you would have told me they were going to break 30 points, I'd have taken your house, my house, and wagered it.
Yeah, I mean, that's just that whole kind of game captures how this league has been this year, just how kind of unpredictable, surprising, just, kind of topsy-turvy it's been. But yeah, I mean, great game. Late night game. Unfortunately, I think because it was so late, not as many people maybe got to see that one. But if you didn't, go back and watch the highlights because it was a great game. Came right down to the wire.
Fun.
Yeah, again, a lot more offense than anybody expected. Wasn't a defensive kind of snooze fest. So, but yeah, both teams. It's unfortunate for the Maulers. Their offense seemed to take a good step forward against the Stars defense that has been vulnerable at times this year. But the one time they're able to do that, the defense kind of has
their off game
points given up, their worst game of the year. So, if I was a Maulers fan, obviously you got to feel a little discouraged about being 2-5 and sitting outside of the top two spots in the North and coming into the home stretch. But, if the offense can, kind of keep up that production and the defense can kind of ratchet it down for the last couple of games of the year, they're not necessarily out of it yet. But it's tough to lose that game for sure. And then the Stars, I mean, I think I was mentioning this the other day, but I think just you're beginning to see, in my opinion, kind of that veteran leadership,
absolutely,
that veteran experience. I think there was around the league, and I think you talked to Channing Stribling about this,
absolutely.
But around the league, there was a lot of alarm bells going off, oh my gosh, the Stars are terrible. They're going to finish last in the North, or they're going to win another game, all this kind of stuff. But they've got so many guys that have been there before. They got hot at the end of last year. They've got a great coach who has a very calm demeanor. He doesn't freak out about things. They've obviously got an experienced quarterback who led them to the championship last year. Like, they've got all the pieces, and we all knew they had all the pieces, but that veteran leadership and experience, that's really starting to pay off now as we get into the home stretch. And, if they can continue on the path that they've been on the last couple of weeks, it seems like they'll be able to lock up the number one spot in the North, which, again, a couple of weeks ago, nobody would have predicted that, it seemed like. So kudos to them for kind of trusting the system and continue to, just take it one game at a time. They've really turned things around.
Yeah, they stayed with the program, so to speak, using that old cliche. They did not panic, even though they were 1-3, and it was not a good 1-3, Luke, but they've turned it around mostly because they found a way to keep Cookus upright. He's not running for his life nearly as much as he was in the first 3-4 weeks of the season. Also, they have managed to get the running game going. Colburn last week, 82 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's what you want to see out of Philadelphia in terms of balance. And now they're in the exact same position as they were last year at 4-3, finding their stride. The only difference now is they're not trailing the Generals by 3 games. They're in the catbird seat, and they're probably, the way I'm looking at it, probably a win away from clinching one of the 2 playoff spots in the division. They'll probably get 2 out of 3 wins to close out the season the way the schedule plays out. But I think they're like a win away from getting in there. And with the USFL not having true home fields yet for playoffs, it's just about getting in. It doesn't matter if you're the 1 or the 2. So Philadelphia in fantastic shape as they gear up for their big game next week, or this week now, against Birmingham. Let's get into the Sunday games, Luke. The Gamblers and the Showboats in what we all felt was the most interesting and exciting looking matchup of the week, and it did not fail to deliver. The Showboats coming out on top 23-20. It was interesting in this game where the Showboats held a 10-point lead. It was 16-6 for a long stretch of the second half, and the Gamblers really appeared like they could not figure out what to do offensively. Then suddenly they take the lead, and you figure yourself, well, there it is for the Showboats. They finally got caught, and then they strike back to win the game. So it was a lot of fun to watch, and it's sad to think that one of these 2 or maybe both of these teams may not be in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, 2 great teams, both have some great players. Awesome game to watch. And, the Memphis crowd was great. They showed out and they were super into the game. And so it was a really fun one to catch. Again, another one worth going back and watching the highlights if you missed it. But yeah, it's tough that in the South, really all 4 of the teams, at least right now, could make a strong case for being, one of the top teams in the league and sort of worthy of playoff, consideration. But, only 2 can go. So most likely, it's still probably, I'm sure, possible that the Showboats and Gamblers could both make it. But seems like most likely, probably only one of those 2 will. And right now, I mean, in both of these teams were so hot going into this game. The Gamblers had won 4 in a row. The Showboats had won 3 in a row.
Yep.
But I did feel like going to the game, the Showboats were a little bit hotter, and that seemed to be the case throughout the game. But they were never really able to pull away like you described. And the Gamblers, they kind of shot themselves in the foot at points. They didn't capitalize on the opportunities they had, but they finally put themselves in a position to win at the end. But it was the Showboats' day. That things were going to work out for them. It seemed like so.
You called it, by the way.
I think I did. Yeah, I don't know. I just had a feeling. It was the Showboats are riding high right now. It's like Ducky said. Ever since Todd Haley was twerking in the locker room, they can't lose. So
wow.
They really
to my success, huh?
They really unlocked something. Yeah, that's actually when Todd Haley writes a book after he retires. That's going to be there's going to be a chapter in there about his dance moves and how that really resurrected their season.
Amazing.
But yeah, no, I mean they've got clearly they've got a different mojo about them, a different energy about them than when they lost 42-2.
Right.
And their defense has been just light years from where they were at the beginning of the year. I mean, John Atkins in the middle, like that dude was just terrorizing the Houston Gamblers all game. I mean, 5 passes batted down, multiple sacks, multiple QB pressures.
Dominant performance.
Yeah, I mean, so their defensive line played great. They've got some really good people in the back end. So I mean, they've got to feel good about where they're at. I mean, if you had told anybody again after they started 0-3 that they'd be number 2 in the South going into week 8 and kind of control their own destiny, I mean, nobody would have believed you after what we saw the first couple of weeks. I mean, week 1 and week 3, they had some flashes of they were kind of in those games, but it seemed kind of dysfunctional and I don't know, they just didn't seem to have a lot of potential. But kudos to them because they're not a team I would want to play right now if I was having to pick somebody to go up against, just the way they've turned things around.
It's interesting, and we'll talk about their next game in a minute. But if you'd have told me after week 3 that the 0-3 Showboats and the then 2-1 Generals a month from now would be completely flip-flopped in where they stood in their standings in their respective divisions. I would have never believed you, because not because the Generals were looking so great, but because the Showboats were not looking good at all. And it's a completely different vibe, completely different team. A lot of it has to do with them finding a running game as well, kind of coincided with the same time that Cole Kelly seized the quarterback position. All of those things came together and has spurred the Showboats to these great wins that they've been putting together. And like I said to you a week ago, it's awesome to see them right there in the mix after the 0-3 start, because nothing would have been worse than for them to be completely out of it heading into these last couple of weeks with the games being so key to the division being decided and all taking place in Memphis. Now you're set up for some great crowds for the last 2 weeks, and Memphis really has a legit shot of grabbing one of those two playoff spots.
Yeah, no, it'll be huge games. They get to play, I think, the Breakers, week 9, and then the Stallions week 10. I mean, those are huge games, and yeah, I'm sure the crowd will come out in full force for that. And I think what we need to do is have like a side-by-side video of Todd Haley after like weeks 2 and 3, going after opposing coaches, everybody upset. And then a video of this past week when he's getting interviewed and players are coming up to him and are like, Todd Haley, the best coach in the league. And he's laughing and having fun. And it's just like that, those 2 videos would capture like how the season started versus how it's going now.
Right.
And it, couldn't really be any more different. So it's good for them for sure. Good for the league. Exciting to see how it's going to shake out down the home stretch, but it's going to be fun no matter what happens.
And just to punctuate the Showboats turnaround, not to discount Todd Haley's evolution as a coach, he's starting to make some more sound in-game and situational decisions, say, compared to a year ago or even in the first 3 weeks of the season. The last game of the week last week, Luke, was the Michigan Panthers traveling to Canton to face the New Jersey Generals. Both teams at the time 2-4. Panthers on a 4-game slide, Generals at the time on a 3-game slide. And it was a competitive game, at least at the end, but it felt like once the Panthers seized control in that middle portion of the game, you never really got the sense that the Generals were going to find their way back into it, even though they kind of did at the end. They kept shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah, got to give credit to the Panthers. I mean, they went up against a great Generals defense. Obviously, they were missing some key pieces, but we're still able to put together a pretty good offensive outing overall and, score 25 points, which is not nothing against a good Generals defense.
Second most the Generals have allowed all year, only 27 by Birmingham
in
week 1.
Yeah. So you got to give the Panthers credit for that, especially when they've had some struggles of their own recently and could have easily come out and just kind of laid down and quit. So great performance by their offense, good performance by their defense too. With the Generals, it's just kind of, we've talked about it and you've talked about it, the Generals as well as anyone, but
a broken record right now.
Yeah. It's just, obviously the defense is good. They're going to continue to be good. They're going to be better once they get, Chris Orr back and Luwani, but, offensively, it's just hard to figure out what the identity is, what's going on. I think for me as an armchair coach, I do wonder why Darius Victor hasn't gotten more carries. I mean, he's done a great job, I feel like, with when he's been called upon. Obviously, he's had some turnover issues and things, but I would like to see, he seems like one of those running backs to me where it's like he only gets better the more you give him the ball. You know what I mean? So I would like to see him really be leaned on more than they have, especially with the inconsistency at quarterback. But, again, there's no Kevontae Turpin to bail them out on the outside and just do incredible things. There's obviously the inconsistency at quarterback. And I don't know. What do you think about, obviously they're bringing in EB as a new quarterback, DeAndre. It's hard to say his status, or you might know better than me, where he's going to be at. But how are you feeling about this offense going into the final couple games of the season? Because they don't really have time to figure it out. I mean, every game for them is huge now.
Yeah, they're all playoff games at this point. You mentioned that earlier, and I actually asked Coach Riley yesterday. I said, Coach, with all the remaining games, essentially playoff games from this point out, are you going to maybe open up the playbook and possibly inject a little extra creativity to spark things a little bit. And his answer was that, they may dip into the playbook a little bit, but it's really about just getting the guys to execute. And that's what's happened with the Generals. They haven't executed in key situations from a coaching standpoint, from a play decision-making standpoint, and then also just the players themselves, whether it's missing a block or whether it's running into the wrong part of the line on a 4th and 2, or so many of those penalties that have hurt them on big plays. I mean, just in the last 2 games alone, Luke, they've had 4 ineligible man downfield penalties, each one of them wiping out a big play, including the game-tying 3-pointer a week ago. So that got wiped off, and the Generals ended up that field goal shy. Again, decision-making, a big part of the problem. Coach Riley also mentioned that last year when the Generals were winning all these close games, those few plays that separate you from winning and losing were all going their way while they were winning 9 in a row. And this year, they're not going their way at all. And here we are in the middle. They are in the middle of a 4-game losing streak. But at the same time, you keep saying to yourself, should they clean up the penalties? Should they cut down on the turnovers, which they did a week ago, only 1. Not that only 1 is good, but down from 4 is an improvement. Then this team will be in the game at the end. And they are in every game, but they're not on top when that final gun sounds. So this week, of course, is probably the toughest matchup they've had in a while, maybe going back to the New Orleans game, actually. And we'll see what the Generals bring to the table with their season on the line emotionally. They're going to be without Tyshawn Render, who's their leading sack master, who has 3.5 sacks. Chris Orr and Shalom Luani are working their way back into the lineup, but they're going to be game time decisions. Coach Riley didn't say that they were a lock to play. So without those 3 guys, the Generals. Now, listen, Paris Ford and Mike Bell Jr. did a great job last week in filling in for those 2 missing players. So Generals to come up with 3 wins here at the end of the year when they've only got 2 in the first 7 games. I don't know, Luke.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I mean, I think this week is going to be huge. I mean, if they pull off the win this week, I think obviously got to feel a lot better about their chances going into the home stretch, sitting at, 3-5 instead of 2-6. But
right. 2-6, it's over. A loss this week and it's over for them.
Yeah.
That's it.
And unfortunately for them, they got to play the hottest team in the league. So they can definitely do it. They can win. They can beat the Showboats. But again, like you described, they're not going to do it if they turn the ball over, commit a bunch of penalties, and don't execute. The margin for error is about as thin as you can get. So we'll see how it shakes out, but it's a must win for sure for them.
Yeah, let's just segue right into talking about this game. We're going to go a little out of order. It's the Sunday game. It kicks off at 1:00. It's on Fox, and the Showboats are cruising into Canton with those 4 straight wins. We just talked about the Generals stumbling with 4 straight losses. It's one of those games now, like we said a second ago. A month ago, if you would have said to me that the Generals were going to be the team on the ropes heading into week 8, I would have been scratching my head because of the Showboats being 0-3. But here we are. Now, these 2 teams on divergent paths, Luke. It's like they flip-flopped identities somewhere around week 4. And I don't know if the Generals can pull this one out, Luke.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to bet against the Showboats right now, the way they're playing. The only, let me give you my best case scenario for the Generals, in addition to them obviously executing and playing as well as they can and stuff like that, the only thing you could maybe hope for as a Generals fan, I think, is, the Showboats are coming off that super emotional high victory over their rival Gamblers, moving back into playoff contention. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, teams after a big win like that, a big game like that, there can sometimes be a crash on the other side where it doesn't always, carry over into the next week. And so, maybe if I was a Generals fan, you could hope the Showboats maybe come into this game a little bit flat. They don't have that same, energy as that huge showdown last week with the Gamblers, that kind of, that rivalry game put them into playoff contention. And if they maybe come out and, maybe I don't know, throw an interception or two or have a fumble, kind of maybe the Generals force some turnovers and capitalize and kind of get up ahead quick and kind of score some points, then they can allow their defense to kind of, pin their ears back and sort of do their thing.
Right.
There's certainly, I think, you know, I could see a scenario like that playing out where things kind of, go the Generals' way. But like I said earlier, I mean, the margin for error feels super thin. I mean, obviously, if they get down, I don't think their offense has the firepower to kind of outlast the Showboats and what they can do with the weapons they have. So I think it's going to be I think it'll be a good game just because, again, the Generals defense is going to keep them in it.
They're in every game, right?
Yeah, they're going to keep the Showboats to 20 to 25 points, probably somewhere in that ballpark at the most. And, it's a matter of how few points are they going to be able to keep the Showboats to, and how many are they going to be able to come up with? Which that's obviously the big question mark. So, they can do it. I definitely think the Generals are more than capable of winning this game, but again, they're going to have to get some things to go their way. And I guess the last thing I'll say, I guess, is maybe the most hopeful thing for them is just the way this league has played out this year, right? I mean,
correct.
It's every time you think a team is down and out, they pull off some crazy win to get right back in the middle of things, and every time you think a team looks unbeatable, they get beaten. So if nothing else, it might be time for the Showboats to get knocked down a peg and for the Generals to bounce back.
Let's muddy the waters a little more, shall we?
Yeah, I mean that could. It would certainly be on brand for this year,
for this league, right? A loss for the Showboats hurts them, but doesn't eliminate them. A loss for the Generals pretty much closes the book on their 2023 season. Let's go back in order now. Saturday's games: Gamblers on the road taking on the Maulers in Canton. We already talked about where these teams currently are. Luke, can the Maulers defense slow down Mark Thompson and Kenji Bahar enough for their offense and I guess now special teams to score enough points to beat Houston?
I think they can. Again, I think it'll be interesting to see how these teams respond from last week. The Maulers, again, must-win situation for them. 2-5 record, a loss here. They're could be eliminated pretty much from playoff contention. Last week they had that great offensive performance in a lot of ways. I mean, I don't know if I should say great. I mean, they had a great first half.
Great for them.
Yeah. And they were able to put up a lot of points. Still wasn't enough. So, how do they respond to that, right? Do they come out, a little deflated, play a little flat, or do they, really rise to the occasion and say, hey, playoffs begin now. Like, let's go. We got to win. I think their defense is certainly capable of slowing down the Gamblers. Their front seven is so good. I think, Mark Thompson's going to get yards and he's going to probably score at least 1 or 2 touchdowns, but, you can at least try to contain him. And I think they're more than capable of doing that. Bahar, it's kind of, which Kenji Bahar shows up, right? Is it the one from the first couple weeks that threw, 6 interceptions in 2 games or something like that? Or is it the one from I think it was weeks 3 and 4 that threw 1 interception and 6 touchdowns and, was kind of, lighting the world on fire. So, I think if I was the Maulers, I'd feel better about my chances trying to stop Thompson and force Bahar to beat you with his arm, especially given that the Maulers have a good secondary. But, then again, it's how many points are they going to be able to score? The Gamblers are going to score some, it's just kind of similar, like we said with the General Showboats,
same kind of scenario. Absolutely.
The Maulers defense is going to play well. They're going to probably limit the Gamblers to, again, 20 to 25 points at the most, I would guess. Assuming they bounce back from last week, I would assume that defense probably took it personal last week, that they went up against a Stars offense that hadn't scored a touchdown in 2 games and they gave up 37 points. So I would think that defense has going to come out with something to prove and is, going to play well. But again, it's just how many points are they going to be able to score? And on the other side of the ball, I mean, it's the same thing for the Gamblers. How do they respond? Huge loss to the Showboats, rivalry game. They thought they had them beat, gave up a huge play at the end. Doesn't ruin their season, but now makes things a little more complicated than if they had instead been sitting at 5-2. They don't have as much of they got to start winning and winning now kind of thing. So, yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see. This is kind of a strange matchup. I think two very different teams play very different ways,
Right.
and obviously different divisions and different spots, kind of, but also kind of similar in a way. Need to respond after a tough loss. So I'm intrigued to see what happens to this one. It's hard for me to kind of prognosticate how it'll play out, but I think it'll be a good game. But there's a lot of variables, I think, in this one.
Yeah, and the Gamblers have shown that when they face a good defense, they do struggle. They've scored in the last 2 weeks only 36 points combined, putting up 20 against Memphis last week, only 16 against New Jersey a week before. So the blueprint is there on how to keep the Gamblers out of the end zone. The only question now is what do the Maulers got left here after a string of incredibly great defensive performances, which yielded very few wins. Season on the line, like you said, can they get up one more time and squeak one out? We shall see.
Yeah, it'll be a good game, I think. But don't ask me to give you a winner or a score because I have no idea.
No, every time we try to predict a score, we're almost always way off.
Yeah.
The big one of the weekend is also on Saturday, 3:00 Eastern time on NBC, and it is a rematch of last year's championship game. The streaking Philadelphia Stars, who are 4-3, the Birmingham Stallions, who after that little earlier season stumble are 5-2. This is shaping up to be a fun game, Luke.
Yeah, it's we talked about this earlier this week, but it's kind of exactly the game that we thought we would get and we hoped we would get. The funny thing is, what it took for us to get here, because, again, a couple of weeks ago, the Stars looked down and out.
Dead.
The Stallions, they were never really out, but they looked much more, vulnerable than last year. Did not look invincible at all. It was kind of, touch and go there for a minute of like, where are the Stallions going to sit by the time we get to the end of the season. But here we are. Stallions, the lone holder of the number one spot in the South. The Stars, the lone holder of the number one spot in the North. Two championship teams from last year back on top of their divisions going into the home stretch and getting to face each other again. So huge showdown, exactly what you'd want as a fan of either team or the league, I think. And it should be a great game. The Stallions, I think, are getting healthier. I think they've had enough time where some of the guys that kind of got thrust into starting jobs have gotten, more experience under their belt and kind of settled.
Yeah, the extra reps have helped finally.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the defense seems to have kind of figured some things out, and they're getting a lot more pressure from the D-line perspective. The linebacker play has, Quentin Poling obviously has been a huge, guy to step in the gap for them with Scooby going down, and the other linebackers have gotten healthy, and they've got a kind of a good rotation, I think, with the guys they've got in there. So they're kind of, I think, finding their groove. Obviously, Magoo is just, MVP of the league right now, and he's just been incredible, and it, to his credit, remarkably consistent too. I mean, he's had some, the funny thing is, like, his bad games for him, like if you look at his numbers and go back and watch, they're still incredible games. It's just
the Pittsburgh game, I think, where he threw the 2 early picks is the one that you could call his bad game this year, and he still turned it around. And they won the game.
By the end of the game, he put the team on his back
to normal. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just like, he's been incredibly good. And, it's not like just an early peak and now he's just falling off the cliff kind of thing. So, they found a running game recently. I mean, Marable has been amazing the last 2 weeks. And, I think the 2 weeks combined, he's sitting at like just a little bit shy of 400 all-purpose yards in those 2 games.
Wow.
So he's doing a lot, which has been great to kind of, take a little bit of the pressure off Magoo to kind of do everything himself. So they're, I think, kind of hitting their stride. They're obviously, they know what they're capable of. They've got their sights set on repeating for sure, but just taking it 1 week at a time. And then on the other side of the ball, I mean, we talked about the Stars earlier, but they are really starting to show their veteran leadership and experience. Cookus is starting to look more like himself. They're doing a better job protecting him. They're getting the ball, running the ball again. I mean, I think for both of these teams at the beginning of the year, you saw some flashes of the previous season,
right,
what it could be, but you also saw some pretty glaring weaknesses, and the question mark was like,
where's this going? Right.
Right. Are they going to be able to figure these things out, fix these things, or is it going to catch up to them and they're going to find themselves sitting outside the playoffs and that kind of thing? And both of them, to their credit, have, again, it's a testament to two of the best coaches in the league, probably. And again, veteran leadership on the team and all those kinds of things. But they both have really seemed to have addressed some of their weaker spots. They're getting better. They're improving. And, it'll be interesting to see, when these two teams meet on the field, what the outcome is, because it's going to be a great game. And I'm sure a very close game and hard to, again, another hard one to predict. But I think it's going to be the matchup to watch and the one we all kind of hoped we would get at the beginning of the year.
And there's no reason to think that this isn't a possible championship game preview as well, because both of these teams are going to be in the playoffs. Really exciting stuff on Saturday with that Stars Stallions game. I think it is the marquee matchup. We wrap up the weekend, Luke, with the Panthers and the Breakers, two teams who are, the Breakers just on the outside looking in because of tiebreakers, whereas the Panthers, remarkably, after a 1-4 stretch, find themselves in a playoff spot and sole possession of it, controlling their own destiny. The question here now is, can the Panthers build upon the offensive momentum that they found a week ago against New Jersey, carry that over into this game against the Breakers, and then conversely, can the Breakers just find the end zone, please?
Yeah, that's the question. I think after the Breakers lost their first game a couple of weeks ago and dropped to 4-1, for the following game, I was really thinking that they would come out and kind of go back to their winning ways, wipe the floor with, I believe it was the Stars that they played. And, and I was wrong about that. And what's become clear is the issues that the Breakers have are not just kind of one-off bad day issues. They're full-blown issues. And like you said, their main issue being they haven't been able to find the end zone after, the first couple of weeks seems like that's all they could do. But I mean, they can't get the ball in the end zone now. So
they've been exposed since week 4 against New Jersey.
Yeah.
They had that great first drive where they drove down for a touchdown in about 3 minutes, and that's been it. They've been on shutdown since week 4, second quarter on.
Yeah.
Against New Jersey. That's a long stretch now to be struggling to figure out who you are with the playoffs looming.
Well, and if you think about the whole season too, I mean, week 1, their offense wasn't great against the Maulers week 1.
Right. They couldn't close the deal. They had a lot of red zone trips. They ended up kicking 5 field goals. Correct.
Week 2 against the Gamblers, they put up a lot of points, I think 38, which the Gamblers at that point, their defense, they lost all those huge pieces and they really hadn't figured out an identity yet. They really, they weren't playing as well as they were now. And then week 3 against the Stallions, I don't want to take anything away from what the Breakers did, but I do think two things. One, the Stallions were dealing with some injuries. Scooby was out. They had some, Joe Jackson was out. They didn't have, some of the again, like we just talked about with them, some of the, reps that these guys that kind of got thrust in there now have. And then also I think, the Breakers, and again, to their credit, that was their Super Bowl kind of, it's like you could tell they wanted that game bad. They probably busted their butt in practice all week. I'm sure they put in extra time preparing, reviewing.
They were motivated after losing 3 straight to Birmingham. No doubt about it.
They couldn't do anything wrong that game, and they were able to put up 45 points. And
might have peaked right there though.
Yeah, but that was it. I mean, that was kind of their Super Bowl, and since then they haven't had that same energy. And so the Panthers defense is good. We all know about Breland Speaks. We all know about Frank Ginda, LT at cornerback out there. I mean, they've got some great defenders. So it's not like they've got an easy task to get back on track this week against just kind of, a soft defense or something like that. Their line struggled a little bit last week against the Stallions. So I imagine the Panthers are going to probably try and pin their ears back and get pressure on MBT, which if they can, I think, again, it's going to be hard for him to find a rhythm. It's just, I don't know. I mean, you want to think that given the flashes that we've seen from them this year, they'll be able to correct some of those things, but they've had plenty of opportunities to do that. So,
how long are we going to wait for that to happen?
Exactly. But I mean, it's hard to believe in the Panthers either. You know what I mean? I guess the Panthers haven't, lost on the road yet. So maybe that's the best thing going for them, is that they're not playing at Ford Field, so they've got a great chance to win. So I don't know, but these two teams, it's like, it's kind of one of those games where it's like, who I don't know if it's like a question of who's going to win the game. It's like, who isn't going to lose the game?
Who's right? Who doesn't? Right? Who doesn't lose the game? That's correct.
So yeah,
it's interesting because we were speaking about the General Showboats game earlier, where if the Showboats lose, we didn't feel like they're kind of out of the race, whereas the Generals would be totally out of it. Mm-hmm. Conversely, in this game, I feel like it's the Breakers who would be on the ropes if they lose, despite the Panthers, potentially dropping to 3-5 with a loss. It's New Orleans that puts themselves in a deeper hole if they lose at 4-4.
Yeah, especially if the other South teams win.
Right.
I mean, if the other three South teams won and the Breakers lost, now they're really in trouble.
Yeah.
Sure. It's hard for me to think that if the Breakers lost, at least you got to think probably, I mean, who knows, but probably at least 2 out of the 3 other Southern teams win. So, I mean, depending on who won and who lost, I mean, the Breakers, are probably either sitting at, 4-4, maybe with one other team outside of the playoff contention, or potentially sitting at, 4-4 and everybody else is 5-3 or something like that,
right.
So yeah, I mean, I think, again, statistically speaking, if they lose, they're not eliminated. They still kind of control their own destiny. But 4-4 going into games against the Showboats and the Gamblers,
that doubt starts creeping in. You're wondering, what do we got to do around here to get a win? All of those things start to play a factor in the mental side of the game. And then you're staring at 2 big games at the end of the season on the road in Memphis. It becomes a mighty tall order for the Breakers if they don't come out with a win this week.
Yeah.
Absolutely. These games are all going to be close this week. I know we think some could potentially be blowouts, but the way things have transpired in the last couple of weeks, especially, I'm ready for 4 games to come down to the wire once again, with the question mark of who's going to win any of the 4. I really don't have a firm feeling or prediction on any one of these 4 games as to who's going to come out on top this week, Luke.
Yeah, no,
good or bad?
I mean, it's another week where, you could make a case for either team in any game, and it certainly would not be a stretch at all.
Yeah, nothing's far-fetched about anything that we've kind of discussed about any of these teams. They're all capable of having the game, and we don't know when that's going to be. And that's the magic of the USFL.
Yeah, absolutely.
This was a great episode, Luke. Enjoy the games. I will be in Canton this week, so I'll be looking for guys like Ducky and James and whoever else is going to be out there. It should be a pretty good time. The weather is going to be good as well. So enjoy the games, awesome. Everybody. Make sure you follow Luke on Twitter at Luke Miller PFN. Follow me at NJ_Generals for all the Generals info. And then we've got our main account at USFL Today. And you can follow us on YouTube as well at USFL Today. That's where you find this show and all of our other shows. But that is it for week 8. Amazingly, Luke, we'll get back together again next week for week 9. And I fully expect the waters to be further muddled.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, again, the only certainty in this league this year is uncertainty. So
it's great stuff.
Yeah, it is fun. It definitely makes it more engaging down the stretch. It's going to be an awesome couple of weeks here to see how it all shakes out.
Have a great week, everybody. Enjoy the games. We'll see you next time on USFL Game Plan.